Tonight, we return to the ruins of the man who claimed to find Atlantis and was never seen again. The waves roll slow and heavy against the shore, each one a muted drumbeat in the dark. Somewhere beyond them, far past the horizon, lies the place he swore was real. He never came back to prove it. The only thing that returned was a single letter, creased, salt-stained, and sealed with no return address. Inside, a map drawn in hurried strokes, ink blurred as if written during a storm, and 5 words scrawled in the corner. I have seen the gates. You can almost smell the brine trapped in its fibers. You can almost hear the scratching pen, the tremor in his hand. But most of all, you feel the weight of the promise that in an age of satellites and sonar, there are still corners of this earth that swallow men whole. So before we set sail in the wake of a ghost, take a breath, look around, because the places we're about to follow him into, you probably won't survive. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Tell me where in the world you're listening from and what time it is there right now. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. The envelope arrives without ceremony. No courier, no stamp. Just placed, somehow, on the desk of a maritime historian in Lisbon, a man who would later swear the office had been locked all night. The seal breaks easily, almost too easily, as though it had been opened before. Inside, the map shows a stretch of the mid-Atlantic ridge, annotated with strange symbols, some resembling constellations, others looking more like ancient alphabets. In one corner, the date, 1977. The signature is only a surname, barely legible, but to those who know the whisper net of lost explorers, it's enough to ignite an old story, one that ends with a vanishing. His name drifts through old maritime records like a shadow, Lionel Gray. Born in 1931 in Bristol, England, he grows up with the smell of ship tar in his lungs and stories of vanished sailors in his ears. His father, a merchant marine, dies at sea when Lionel is 12. From then on, his life bends toward the ocean like a plant seeking the sun. By his 20s, he's working salvage in the Mediterranean, pulling up anchors from the Roman Empire and shards of amphorae from Phoenician traders. That's the historical fact people remember, that Gray was no amateur. He had the skill, the charts, the deep-sea instincts of a man who listens more to currents than to clocks. And yet, alongside his legitimate finds, Lionel collects other things, fragments of unverified stories, impossible rumors, whispers about ancient structures lying far below the reach of ordinary dives. In bars from Tangier to Port-au-Prince, he's the man in the corner booth asking fishermen if they have ever seen lights under the waves, or heard the strange hum on calm nights. A fringe belief takes root in him after an encounter in Morocco. There, an aging pearl diver shows him a carved disc made of an unfamiliar metal, claiming it was dredged from the Canary Basin. The symbols on it match no known script, but Lionel swears later they echo Plato's description of Atlantean glyphs. Whether this is truth or just the diver's cunning sail pitch, historians still argue. By the mid-1970s, Gray becomes more secretive. He stops sharing his finds with museums. He begins charting the mid-Atlantic ridge obsessively, convinced it's not just a geological scar, but the backbone of a drowned civilization. Friends notice his conversations turning elliptical, his gaze somewhere far beyond the present. And then, in 1977, he announces to a single confidant that he's found the gateway. He won't say more. The next week, he's gone from every port he's known, leaving behind only a storage locker with half-empty logbooks and a compass that doesn't point north. In the dusty corner of the Lisbon Maritime Archive, there's a box marked only with the number 4127. The archivist swears it hasn't been touched in decades, yet when it's opened, the scent of salt and mildew rises like a ghost from the deep. Inside are brittle maps, folded letters, and a weathered leather-bound journal with Lionel Gray's name pressed into the cover. The entries begin conventionally, neat handwriting, coordinates, and tide tables. But page by page, the lines loosen, becoming sketches of spiraling cities, towers like needles, and coastlines that don't exist on any modern map. One margin note, dated 6 months before his disappearance, simply reads, The stones hum at night. A historical fact anchors itself amid the madness. In 1975, Gray registered a permit to dive off the Azores under the guise of geological surveying. The records confirm his vessel, the Peregrine, spent 3 weeks in waters notorious for unpredictable currents. No significant finds were reported. But in his journal, a different story emerges. He writes of a shadow beneath the vessel, longer than any whale, more patient than the tides. He describes feeling vibrations through the hull, rhythmic, deliberate, like the pulsing of a distant engine. A fringe belief he scribbles in the margin claims that certain seafloor ridges are not natural at all, but collapsed walls of ancient harbors. Tucked between 2 pages is a torn scrap of parchment with faded ink, coordinates again, but crossed through and rewritten in a hurried hand. Historians still debate whether this was a correction or a misdirection, meant to keep others from following too closely. And then there are the letters, addressed to no one, unsigned, but clearly meant for someone he trusts. In them, Gray warns that he is close to the outer ring and that the currents here are not wind-driven, but will-driven. He promises proof, though he admits he does not yet understand the cost. The last confirmed sighting of Lionel Gray comes from a Portuguese dockworker named Esteves. It is late September 1977, the air heavy with the smell of diesel and salt. Esteves watches from the pier as the Peregrine takes on crates of provisions, preserved meats, freshwater barrels, and what look like strange, custom-built diving frames, unlike anything used by commercial crews. Historical records confirm that weeks saw an unusual drop in barometric pressure over the central Atlantic, hinting at storms brewing beyond the horizon. Any seasoned mariner would delay departure. But Lionel moves with an urgency that defies common seamanship. According to Esteves, there's a moment when Gray pauses at the edge of the dock, scanning the dark water, as if listening for a signal no one else can hear. In his hand is a sealed glass cylinder. Esteves swears he saw faint light flickering inside it, a soft blue pulse, like bioluminescence trapped in a jar. A fringe belief in maritime lore holds that certain light catchers, artifacts capable of holding deep-sea glow, were once used by ancient navigators to guide their way through abyssal darkness. From here, the Peregrine slips into the open Atlantic, bound west by southwest. Weather charts from that week suggest she sailed directly toward the Great Meteor Seamount, an underwater plateau that some fringe theorists claim could have been a highland in a prehistoric age. Whether that claim has any geological merit, historians still argue. What happens next is pieced together from fragments, radio logs, intercepted Morse transmissions, and one eerie note in a coastal watch station's records. Unidentified vessel drifting eastward, sails furled, lights visible beneath hull. No name, no flag. By the time a patrol ship arrives at the coordinates, there is nothing. Just the swell of the Atlantic and a single crate, half sunk, stenciled with the faded words, "Property of L. Gray." Inside, a rusted diving knife and a soaked page from his journal, smeared but still legible. The gate is open. He arrives at the forgotten port at the far edge of the archipelago, where cliffs break like teeth and the wind keeps a private grammar. The harbor is small, a crease in dark basalt, an iron ladder bolted into rock blackened by storms. Men tie their boats with hands that move before thought. Women carry salt on their sleeves and folded prayers in their pockets. It is a place that appears on maps as a dot and in memory as a threshold. Here, Lionel Gray waits for the tide to turn. He has chosen this inlet because big ships ignore it and patrols rarely bother. He has chosen it because the water drops off into darkness a few strokes from shore, as if the island were a rind peeled back to the bone. He has chosen it because the locals, when pressed, say, the currents change their mind here. He listens to the key, to the ropes thrumming, to the low applause of waves against stone, and he marks in his mind the interval between each sound. Rhythm is measure. Measure is passage. A historical fact steadies the scene. The Azores sit on the mid-Atlantic ridge, a seam of earth where plates meet, and the seabed is younger than the myths it has swallowed. Mariners for centuries have called it these islands when crossing between worlds. Horta's harbor murals attest to it. The lighthouse logs on these western capes do too. But this cove, wedged beneath an old lifeboat station and a chapel whose bell has not rung in a generation, is not famous. It resists mention. It prefers secrecy. The priest comes down the steps with a lantern cloaked in his sleeve, not because he fears the wind will put it out, but because here, light travels too far. He nods to Lionel the way old men nod to weather. "The sea is restless," he says, and the sentence is both warning and confession. He offers the old sign of protection. Lionel thanks him, neither accepting nor refusing, and touches the glass cylinder in his satchel as if to reassure it. Fishermen pretend not to watch while watching everything. One smokes beside a coil of line, eyes on the horizon. Another files a hook and glances at the sky where thin, unnatural streamers of cloud pull from the west. "The rope hums on nights like this," the first man says without looking at him. "When it hums, we do not go." Lionel asks quietly, "What is it you hear?" The man answers, "Something deciding." He sets to his final preparations, the way a soldier polishes a blade before dawn. On the quay are the strangers' boxes that Esteve saw at the mainland port, odd frames of brushed steel and straps, weighted boots with articulated ankles, a helmet whose glass face is beveled like a lens. The compressor coughs to life. The gauges climb. He tests the seal on a canister that smells faintly of copper and rain, hears the satisfying bite as the valve seats, and closes his eyes to feel the vibration through his palms. A fringe belief rides the wind in this place, the drowned monastery whose bells ring under certain moons. The oldest sailors claim that when the swell falls away to glass and the fish refuse bait, you can hear bronze tolling below the keel, not a warning, not a lure, but a remembrance. Some say the bells are real, toppled in a quake that took a church into the sea. Others say they never existed, except as explanation for a sound that does not obey weather. Lionel stands very still when a long, low tone threads the harbor. It could be a chain-knocking stone. It could be his own blood. He looks at the priest. The priest has already crossed himself. There are accounts later, conflicting, stubborn, about when exactly he departs. One version says he leaves at blue hour, when the world neither insists on day nor surrenders to night. Another swears it is near midnight. The lanterns along the quay turn toward the wall so their light won't reach the water. Historians still argue whether the lighthouse keeper's note, "single craft outbound, engine minimal, heading WSW," refers to the peregrine or a coastal dory-seeking squid. But in every telling, the same detail returns. The sea across the mouth of the cove moves as if a hand passes beneath it. He takes aboard only 2 men from the port, young, wiry, unpaid except by their own curiosity. They will last a day and a night, then come back with faces like salt-burnt paper and refuse to speak of what they saw. For now, though, they load the last crate together and glance at the chapel steps where a small boy stands barefoot, clutching a carved toy boat whose hull is ringed by circles. The child stares at Lionel and does not blink. "The gate," he whispers, a word that cannot be his own. The boy's mother hushes him and drags him back, eyes wet with a fear that has not learned its reason. From the edge of the quay, the harbor floor drops away like a swallowed stare. The sounder shows it, 40 fathoms, then a smear, then nothing. Lionel studies the paper scroll, watches the stylus scratch and tremble, then level into blankness as if the machine has decided the truth would be impolite. He marks the coordinates in pencil twice. He looks at the cliffs, at their banded edges, at the soft moss where spray lives, and he has the uncanny sensation that the entire island leans forward to listen. Fog comes without warning, not rolling in exactly, but assembling out of the air. The bells from the chapel have no clapper, but something rings low and steady under the fog's weight. The priest's lantern becomes a faded star. In that bruised light, Lionel's face is a geometry of patience and hunger. He unties the last line, and the strand sings as it leaves the cleat. There are rites for leaving, even for the faithless. He performs them without theater. He looks to the cardinal points and then to the swell. He touches the cylinder at his side, and then the rusted compass that refuses north. He rests his hand on the rail and counts to 7. He nods once to the cliff, once to the priest, once to no one. The twin diesels catch, cough, settle. The peregrine pivots with the smallest of gestures and noses into the throat of the open sea. Behind him, the harbor contracts around the space his hull has vacated, sea remembering its shape. The men on the quay say nothing aloud. They gossip in the grammar of shoulders and breath. One of the young crew turns to look back and is slapped lightly by the other, not unkindly, a taboo against calling the sea's attention to your fear. The boy with the toy boat lifts it high, circles carved on circles, and watches until the stern lamp is one cold bead among the fog's many eyes. The headland takes him from sight, but the wake remains longer than it should, a pale seam stitched through slate. On the headland itself, a scatter of low stones, the foundations of something that never learned to be a house, keep their counsel. A gull wheels, refuses to settle, and goes inland. Far offshore, lightning flares silently inside a cloud, like a heartbeat caught beneath ribs. In the little harbor, silence opens. The priest lowers his lantern, hand trembling now that the departure is done. He whispers a prayer, not for safe return, but for clean witness, that if the sea intends to keep this man, it will not keep his name. The fishermen coil their lines, pretending calm. One drags a nail across the keystone, carving a small circle inside a larger one, then scrapes it away with the heel of his hand as if undoing a thought. Night takes the port in the old manner, without ceremony, with authority. The chapel's unvoiced bell is all at once louder than it was, or perhaps the ear has learned it anew. Somewhere past the headland, a motor fades, stops, starts again. Then only the long breath of water. Then only the cliff answering with its own. He has gone. The harbor holds the shape of his leaving the way the palm holds the memory of a blade. And if anyone speaks, it is only to say what the island has always said when a boat crosses that threshold. May the sea want him less than the deep does. They come back at dawn on a borrowed dory, two thin figures hunched against the gunwale as if the sea still presses on their spines. The harbor gives them room, the way a room goes quiet when someone wakes from a bad dream. Salt stains their cheeks in pale ladders where spray is dried. Their eyes are raw, like they have been staring too long at something that wouldn't hold still. They refuse blankets, they refuse bread, they refuse questions. They sit on the pier stones and breathe as if the air were tight and must be coaxed open. Only when the priest kneels beside them and says nothing, only when his silence proves larger than theirs, do words begin to cross from them into the morning. The younger one speaks first, voice rough. He says the sea out beyond the headland is wrong, not rough, not calm, organized. He lifts a shaky hand and draws circles in the air, one inside another, the gesture a child might make at a chalkboard. The swell runs in rings, he says, even when the wind is straight. The older one nods and adds, the current changes without turning. It is like walking downhill in every direction. They tell it in fragments, how the peregrine held west by southwest until the needle gave up its duty and the compass card spun without a center. How Lionel Gray took out the rusted relic that never points north and trusted it more than new brass. How the air went quicksilver at sunset, all edges, no depth, and then it arrived, a light beneath the hull, cool and deliberate, moving as if it were the one studying them. A historical fact steadies and chills their tale. Mariners for centuries have reported St. Elmo's fire, blue tongues of plasma clinging to masts in charged weather, a quiet flame that hisses and blesses. The priest knows that story, the fishermen have seen it. But what the boys describe is not fire on wood. It is light in water, braided and slow, touching the keel like a curious hand, and then drawing away to sketch a ring that closes around them, not fast, not threatening, just deciding. Past midnight, Gray orders the engine idled. He lowers an instrument none of them have seen before, a metal cage with glass slats and weights the shape of bells. The line pays out until the sounder should be screaming bottom, yet the stylus scratches on and on across blank paper like a pen writing the sky. The older boy, the steadier one, whispers that the line never thumped, never sighed into silt. It simply grew lighter, as if whatever waited below had chosen not to be measured. Then the helm shivers. Not rudder, not screw. Something at the bones of the ship. The binnacle glass fogs from within. The oil in the compass forms a single tremulous lens, and the card turns, catches, turns again, clicking with a sound too dry for liquid. Lionel's face is calm in that unnatural frost. He says, "Hold steady. We are over the outer ring." He speaks like a man who has come to the door he spent half his life describing to empty rooms. A fringe belief walks out of the water then and sits down beside the story. Some old coasters in these islands speak of guardian lights, not the docile wavering of phosphorescence, but lamps with grammar, lamps that anticipate, lamps that lead or forbid. They say certain places do not accept soundings, certain hollows answer only to memory. If you drop a lead there, the sea keeps it. If you insist, the sea keeps you. The priest has heard that tale told with wine and laughter. It does not sound like laughter now. The younger boy describes the color of the deep as metal breathing. The older one says the deck trembled beneath his boots, not with waves but with a pulse. They both agree the air became a kind of engine and that a note rose, too low to be named, too steady to be wind. The note did not come from anywhere. It seemed to be the condition of existing on that spot. They lash a lantern to a boat hook and dip it over the rail. The flame contracts, smaller than it should be, as if the water eats radiance. The ring of light below tightens. The engine coughs and dies without struggle. The battery gauge drops and then climbs on its own, stuttering between full and forgotten. The radio, when Lionel hails the watch, replies in syllables that fall apart before they land, consonants like pebbles dropped from a long way up. The log will show attempts at contact, ink broken into dashes and abandoned half-letters. Whether those fragments are interference or something answering in a language of broken cages, historians still argue. The priest asks finally, "How did you come away?" They say that at last, perhaps near dawn, perhaps at a time that had no number, Lionel told them to take the dory and return. No anger, no appeal, only insistence and a kindness sharper than command. "Tell the harbor I am where I intended," he said. "Tell the harbor there is a gate and it opens." He pressed the younger one's wrist and placed the glass cylinder there, the same faintly pulsing light the dock worker saw in a satchel. "If it dies, you will know I've gone through," Lionel said. "If it lives, you will know I'm still asking permission." The boys did not want to leave. The sea wanted them to stay. The dory's painter caught under the stern cleat twice, snagging in nothing, as if the water itself had hands. Only when the older boy cut the line and kicked them free did the boat slide back into the normal grammar of currents. As they pulled away, the light below them uncoiled and divided, two pale threads moving apart like doors parting, and they saw, for a breath, geometry where no geometry should be. A darker dark, arranged in arcs and spokes, the intimation of structure, not reef, not rock, not wreck, but intention. They row until their lungs burn, then raise the little sail and let the island find them. The cylinder in the younger one's fingers keeps its inward glow. Once, near the headland, it sputters to gray, and both boys cry out as if it were a living thing failing. Then the pulse returns, slow and stubborn. Only on the quay, in the first true daylight, does it gutter and go dark, not like a flame starved of air, but like an eye deciding to close. Word spreads by noon. Accounts blossom and contradict. A woman swears she saw a line of pale lamps out beyond the cape drunk walking across the surface. A lighthouse keeper, turning his logbook to a fresh page, writes only, "Needle misbehaved, birds inland, pressure steady despite swell." A salvage captain says the boys are drunk on fright. An old navigator touches the suspended clapper of the chapel's silent bell and says, "They were answered." Whether this is mercy or mockery, nobody knows. The arguments start at the harbor wall and stalk the island by evening. Were the compass errors the child's trick of magnetic rock? Did fear make lights where only plankton burned? Could a tired engine produce pulses a hungry mind would name as song? Historians still argue whether such testimony ever deserves paper. Two sleep-starved youths, a priest with too much myth in his bones, a sea that tells stories to those who need them. But the counterweight to skepticism lies heavy on the stone in front of them, a cylinder of glass that held a light not seen in any fisherman's jar, a light that lived until the exact minute the dory ground her keel on home sand. The boys do not say Lionel is lost, they do not say he is alive, they do not say Atlantis. They only say that he told them to leave because someone had to carry a message back, and messages cannot be delivered from the bottom of the sea. The younger one takes the cylinder in both hands and offers it to the priest. The glass is cool. The faint blue smear inside is dead as memory. The priest cradles it like a relic that has not yet decided what to bless. Night gathers. The harbor stones keep their heat. The chapel's throat hums without bell or wind. Offshore, a trawler changes course for no reason its captain can later explain. And far out, where the ring closed and opened, the surface thickens for a heartbeat, like the skin of milk about to break. He is not seen again, but his absence has weight. It rolls through the island like weather. It settles in the coil of every rope. It listens from the cliff. And in the dory's wet boards, in the boy's careful silence, in the priest's hands around the lifeless light, there is the shape of a door no one can close now that it has been named. For weeks, the island learns how to live with the absence. It doesn't happen all at once. It drifts in like fog, quiet and insistent. Men still mend nets on the pier. Gulls still argue over scraps. The tide still leans and retreats. But under it all, there's that pulse. Not in the sea now, but in the way people look toward the horizon as if listening. The cylinder rests on the altar in the chapel, a glass relic among brass candlesticks and faded prayer cards. By day, it is just an object, a hollow tube, its strange inner light gone as if it had never been. But some swear that, at night, if you approach it without a lantern, the glass will show a faint blush, like moonlight seen through deep water. The priest does not confirm this. He does not deny it. Life tries to resume its shape. The younger boy returns to fishing with his father, but never beyond the headland. The older one takes to walking the cliff path each dusk, a cigarette unlit between his fingers, eyes scanning the sea as if trying to remember the exact pattern of those impossible rings. A fact from the island's past surfaces now in whispers. In 1864, a schooner named Euphemia vanished beyond the Cape. The logbook recovered months later from a drifting lifeboat held only a single entry for the day it disappeared, rings in the water as if drawn by compass, engine dead, lights below, not ours. No wreckage was ever found, no bodies brought home. The handwriting was shaky, the ink blotted by salt, and most dismissed it as a seaman's hallucination. But now, with Lionel gone, that fragment breathes again in the minds of the wary. And yet, the fringe belief grows teeth. Old women speak in their kitchens of the second shore, a place beyond the known world where the sea folds over itself and keeps its own cities. According to the tale, only certain people are invited across, those who carry a question the second shore wishes to answer. They say once you are chosen, you will feel the pull, no matter how far you run inland, and sooner or later you will go back to the water. Not everyone treats it as legend. A geologist from the mainland arrives with a case of instruments, claiming he is studying subsurface anomalies. He spends 3 days taking readings from the cliff, frowning at his seismographs, and leaves without speaking to anyone. The ferry captain swears the man looked seasick the entire time, even on land. Historians still argue whether Lionel's disappearance belongs to the category of maritime vanishings at all. Was he caught in a whirlpool, stranded on an uncharted shoal? Did he simply run for another port under cover of myth, abandoning debts or enemies we'll never know about? The absence of hard evidence leaves room for every theory to stretch, but the people here know better than to confuse absence of evidence with absence of truth. One evening, the older boy bursts into the chapel, breathless. He says he was walking the cliff path when he saw them, 2 pale lights moving in perfect parallel beneath the surface, far beyond the headland. They were slow, deliberate, and they kept their distance. The priest asks if they were the lights of a vessel. The boy shakes his head, says he's seen ships, and this was not a ship. They were watching the shore, he says, like they were waiting for someone to answer. The priest closes the chapel doors for the night, but he does not blow out the candles. Outside, the air is still, the tide slack. And yet, on the edge of hearing, there's a hum, low, steady, untraceable. Far offshore, where the ring once closed and opened, something stirs. Not a storm, not a wave, but a shiver through the surface, as if the sea itself remembers a man who came to its door and was not afraid to knock. The autumn storms arrive early that year, sweeping in from the west with bruised skies and a wind that rattles the shutters of every house on the island. Waves slam against the seawall, sending fans of white spray high into the air. Yet even in the chaos, the talk in the tavern circles back to Lionel Grey. Some swear the storms are the sea's way of closing whatever passage he opened. Others think it's the opposite, that the door is now ajar and the weather is a guard keeping uninvited eyes away. Historical records note that the Atlantic in these months often produces rogue waves, the kind that rise without warning, twice the height of anything else in the swell. Mariners fear them for good reason. But in island lore, such waves are not accidents. They are messengers from the second shore, reminders that the deep has its own moods and its own reach. One evening, between squalls, a fisherman named Duarte returns with something caught in his net that is neither fish nor weed. It is a length of corroded metal, pitted and green with centuries of salt. The strange part is its shape, a curve so precise it forms a perfect arc, as though cut by a machine far beyond the island's capacity. No ship in living memory has carried fittings like it. A fringe belief among the older islanders claims that beneath certain trenches there are still streets, entire avenues of stone where machines once moved, powered not by oars or sails, but by the pulse of the earth itself. The arc Duarte found, they say, could be part of one of those machines, finally loosened and carried upward by the same currents that took Lionel. Historians, predictably, dismiss this as coincidence, noting that old whaling stations sometimes used curved iron to brace boiling vats, but none can explain how such a piece ended up in waters never used for whaling. The storms pass, leaving the island washed clean and oddly hushed. On the first calm morning, the older boy walks the cliff path again and notices something strange. A dark line on the water far out to sea, straight as if drawn by ruler. It does not move with the tide. It simply exists, a silent seam dividing two shades of blue. He follows it with his eyes until it fades into mist. That night, the priest dreams of water running uphill, pouring over steps carved from coral. In the dream, Lionel stands at the top, holding the glass cylinder. He says nothing, but the light inside the tube flares, and the priest feels it strike him like heat. When he wakes, the chapel is cold, the candles burn down to nubs, and the cylinder on the altar has shifted, ever so slightly, as though someone turned it in their sleep. Historians still argue whether the mind, under stress, can conjure convincing illusions, tricks of fatigue and memory. But the priest is not given to visions, and the island, already balanced on the edge between fact and myth, absorbs his silence like it's part of the weather. Far below the calm surface, where currents twist through canyons of black stone, something metallic glints briefly, catching a shaft of light from above. Then it's gone, swallowed again by the slow-breathing dark. The barometer on the island's harbor wall drops 3 millibars in an hour, then 5 more in the next, as if the air itself has lost confidence. At the cliff station, the anemometer begins to chatter, cups spinning up from a polite breeze to a hard, clenched wind that drives salt into every window frame. In the tavern, someone lays a coin on the table to keep it from skittering, and the coin hums faintly against the wood. Out to the west, a smear of slate thickens into a wall. The priest stands at the chapel door and watches the clouds advance in layers, low, fast scud racing beneath a higher deck that does not move at all. Between them, light flickers with no thunder, silent as breath behind glass. The older boy is already on the cliff path, squinting through spindrift at the coordinates he cannot stop seeing when he closes his eyes, the place where the ring opened and the waters seemed to think. A historical fact holds steady at the edge of the storm. The National Meteorological Office notes that year's equinox week as seasonally anomalous, a compact low-pressure system forming unusually far south on the mid-Atlantic, deepening fast, steering east against prevailing guidance. Buoy data shows sharp pressure falls and wave heights that leap beyond the model spread. A scatterometer pass records a tight core of winds howling in a narrow band like wire drawn around a throat. In the archives, it is just an entry, a brief spike in a long graph. To the island, it is the kind of weather that decides, not negotiates. By noon, rain arrives as a sheet. It does not fall. It travels, driven sideways in dense ropes that stitch sea to sky. The lighthouse is a smudge. The surf detonates against the quay, and the bolt rings groan as if remembering older storms. From the headland, the older boy sees something that steals his breath. Beyond the white violence, the sea is smooth, not calm, not safe, but smooth, a dark circular lake amid the chaos, as if the storm had discovered a boundary and chosen to flow around it. He shouts into the wind and no one hears. Gulls vanish inland. The bell-less chapel hums again, a note low enough to make teeth ache. On the pier, Duarte the fisherman nails shut a door that has never needed nails, then turns as the priest touches his arm and simply nods. In the harbor office, the keeper flips open a ledger, writes with a heavy nib, "Rapid cyclogenesis, wind veering unexpectedly south by southeast, swell crossed by second set, origin unclear." He draws a little circle on the page without meaning to, then inks it out and turns the sheet. Signalmen up and down the coast click their lamps experimentally and give up when the rain refuses to carry light farther than the back of their own hands. The radio hisses with a field of needles. A patrol cutter 3 hours east calls once, breaks, calls again with their position, and the number is wrong by 30 miles. They swear their GPS shows one thing, their eyes another. The captain adds with embarrassment that his crew can smell ozone inside the sealed bridge. Storms are supposed to speak a language sailors know. This one does not. A fringe belief moves through the tavern on the back of the wind. Weather guardians, the old men say. Or at least, that is the newest name for something that once had no name. A place that refuses wind. A place the sea protects with its own geometry. There are hollows where a gale walks like a gentleman, an old navigator mutters, and reefs that wear storms like cloaks. But a ring like that? He spreads his fingers on the table and draws them together. That is not for boats. Afternoon collapses into a premature dusk. Then the storm does something no one can explain, not even later, when the charts are studied and the tapes replayed. It leans. The wind, which should drive straight, curls around the headland and flows back toward its own tail, a serpent biting itself. The rain slants first one way, then the other, without a pause between. Sheets of spume lift from the surface and rise, not torn, but pulled, coiling like smoke. Out beyond the cliff, the smooth circle darkens further, not black, but a kind of depth that looks like thought. Lightning cracks, not a fork, but a broad white plain that opens and shuts again with the speed of an eyelid. For a heartbeat, the sea is made of veins. The priest grips the doorframe and remembers the dream. Water running uphill, steps carved where no chisels go. Lionel holding the glass cylinder as if it were a permission slip. He tastes metal at the back of his tongue. He thinks absurdly of bells underwater. Pressure dives another 5 millibars. The keeper's pen scratches. Microburst? Then scratches it out. He writes, roll cloud directly over harbor, but no shelf cloud is expected. He shuffles maps, their edges knife at his fingers. He calls the mainland for a briefing and hears only other keepers talking at once, describing the same wrong wind and the same circle of calm that is not calm at all. We think it's an eye, someone says, but it's not where the barometer says the eye should be. It's where... The gate, the older boy says to the rain, though no one hears him but the storm. At the cliff's lip, spray lashes him sideways. He plants his feet and watches as a long swell folds itself neatly into the curve of the circle and disappears, no splash, no plume, as if the surface there is not surface but skin, flexing inward to receive. Then, in that circle, a flicker. 2 pale lamps moving in slow, exact parallel. So far out their motion should be beyond clean seeing. They are not the color of electricity or oil. They are the color of breath on glass. Historians still argue whether such sightings belong to weather at all. Were those light sprites, upper atmospheric discharges misperceived near the horizon? Was that ring a Kelvin-Helmholtz boundary, a fluid dynamic curiosity carved by wind shear into something almost geometric? Was the pressure fall simply a tight mesoscale low whose physics are difficult and not theatrical? The papers in the years after will try to name it with equations, and most days the island will concede. But not this day. Not with that circle holding its shape, while the greater storm breaks itself against it like surf against a hidden harbor wall. The worst of the wind arrives at evening. It does not scream. It presses, a hand over the island's mouth. Doors bow inward. Slates lift and settle. The chapel's candles gutter sideways and stand again, stubborn in their pools of wax. The priest sets the glass cylinder under the altar and feels foolish, then less so, then not at all. The floor thrums a single note from foundation to rafters, and he realizes the building is not rattling. It is singing, very softly, in reluctance or in answer. For an hour, or for 10 minutes, time has rules and the storm ignores them. The world reduces to water, traveling in impossible vectors, and the island holding a line it did not know it could hold. Then, as if a switch clicks, the weight lifts, not gradually, entirely. The rain continues for a while from habit. The wind, having forgotten itself, wanders off. The circle out beyond the headland remains, darker than the sea around it, and then it too loosens, dissolves into the general texture of ocean, like an eye deciding to close. In the sudden quiet, every sound is huge, a dripping eave, a gull's single cry asking where the others went, a coil of rope sighing back into itself. The keeper stares at his instruments and writes "Rise Plavipator" in 20 minutes. He taps the glass and watches the needle obey a new master. Around midnight, the clouds tear and the sky shows 3 indifferent stars. Power returns to the one street that has wires, flickering along the poles like fireflies selecting perches. The older boy walks home along the cliff path, empty-handed, as if refusing to test whether his hands still shake. Duarte lifts the nailed door again and makes a charm in the air he would deny making. The priest opens the altar cabinet. The cylinder is where he left it. In the dark, it offers nothing. No glow, no warmth, just glass cool as a thought. On the mainland, the storm becomes a chart. On the island, it becomes a story. In the morning, the shore is littered with wrack and drift, torn weed, a blue crate with its handle snapped, a plank from a boat painted in a color no one recognizes, and something round and heavy that at first seems like a buoy but is not. It is metal, ridged, curved with a precision like Duarte's arc, and when men lay hands on it, their palms sting with cold though the sun is out. Is it wreck? Is it scrap frothed up from some trench? Or is it the same thing as the storm was, a message that will not translate without a cost? No one says Lionel's name aloud, but every face that turns toward the horizon is asking the same question without committing it to the air. If a door can call a storm to guard it, what does it call when it means to open? In a room that smells of warm dust and ozone, a reel-to-reel recorder turns with the patience of a clock that has outlived the house around it. The radio officer at the coastal watch station cups his hand over one ear, shut-eyed, listening through static the way a diviner listens through leaves. The storm has eased, but the bands are still crowded with weather. Hiss, crackle, distant voices lifting and drowning. He keeps the gain low to catch the edges where sense hides. On the shelf above him, logbooks line up like modest soldiers. Their pages know how to carry straight things, times, bearings, ship names, positions, the ocean made tidy by pencils. He trusts the books more than he trusts memory. He trusts tape more than he trusts himself. He's been waiting for the peregrine without saying so. At 0221, the noise changes. Not a word yet, a texture, a coherent raggedness, an intention threading the hiss. He leans forward, lifts the headphone off one ear to be sure the sound is not in the room. It is not. He clicks the recorder into record. The reels take the job without complaint, spools turning in the soft-lit belly of the machine. Grind, peregrine to hoard a watch. Clear enough to name. He writes the time, he writes the name, he underlines the name once. Go ahead, peregrine. For a few seconds, only static. Then a voice rides a crest of noise, flattens, rides again. Calm, clipped, unhurried in that way men learn when the alternative is chaos. Position, uncertain, engines serviceable, instruments unreliable. We are over. The rest dissolves into white snow dragged sideways across a screen. The officer marks the frequency with his finger. Mid-frequency maritime band, not the old 500 kilohertz guard, but near it, a place shoulders remember even if procedures have changed. A historical fact steadies his hand. For much of the 20th century, ships in distress tapped out their fate on 500 kilohertz while coastal stations kept vigil. By the 1970s, voice on MF and HF carried more of the burden, but the habit of listening to the old dark stillness never quite left the men built to listen. He tightens the headphone to his ear. Outer ring. The ring. Request vector to the word buckles. Say again, Peregrine. State nature of distress. Negative distress. The voice is firmer now, weathered but whole. Repeat negative distress. Require bearing check. Require confirmation. Silence. Then, as if addressing someone standing beside him. Keep it steady. Then again to the shore. We are observing lights beneath. 2, parallel, persistent, depth, unknown. He hears a second, younger voice briefly, too faint to lift into meaning. He writes 2 aboard, and then draws a line through it. He knows there were 3. He knows 2 came home. Peregrine, say your last good fix. Ma 16 nautical west by south of Great Meteor. But instruments. We have drift set against wind. Compass card. Behaving as if... The sentence breaks off. The officer hears a metallic thunk as if something touched the casing of the set, then a long inhale inked into the noise. A fringe belief walks into the room wearing the look of fact. Some radio men swear certain seas carry their own voices, not signals exactly, but presences that seize the carrier and impress cadence and ghost words into plastic tape. Tales from wartime of disused frequencies, waking with patrol orders no living ship could have sent. Stories from fishermen whose sets filled with litany when the air was clear and the land asleep. He does not believe those men. He does not disbelieve them. He keeps his pencil moving. Peregrine, we show weather easing. Your barometer? There's a pause in which he hears the faint click of a barometer case, the thew of a ship breathing. Rising. A wryness, almost a smile, as if someone decided. The officer looks at the tape notice by the set. Neutral language. He clears his throat of superstition. Understood. State intentions. On the tape a sound enters that is neither voice nor storm. A note so low the machine barely decides to carry it, a continuous tone with no vibrato, not hum, not feedback, filling the space between syllables like water flooding a gap. The officer circles the word tone on his pad and underlines it twice. We will... Lionel Gray's voice steadies itself as if choosing to stand within the word. We will hold station. We are above an opening. The officer feels the hairs on his wrist shift, an old animal inside the bone curious and afraid. He says the thing his training gives him. Peregrine, maintain position. Do not make risky. Gray speaks over him gently, like a man who knows the script and cherishes it, but has already stepped off the stage. We have made careful study, Horta. We are not in distress. If line fails, please inform the island that I have stood where I intended. A scrape, a breath, the second voice again, deferent. Sir. Then a click as if a switch slid on a dry board. Peregrine, say again your intention. We will ask. The officer stops writing. Later, he will hate that blank space in the log, that single line where nothing got written because he could not write a sentence that began, we will ask. He looks up at the clock, sees the second hand move, reassured that at least one thing is as it was. The tape takes everything he cannot. A shift, a hollow in the sound as if the microphone were set down. Then, that low, continuous tone rising half a breath, not louder, just closer. In the background, something like chain runs over something like wood, rhythmic, deliberate. The officer realizes he is listening to the ship prepare, without panic, for something without name. Peregrine, maintain voice contact. Say your sea state. Within the ring, Gray says, and the word ring comes through like a coin dropped on a stone floor. Glassy. Without severe cross-swell. There is an inversion. The surface inside does not accept. The word won't come. Wave. The officer makes himself useful. Recommend you proceed to open C. Weather window now. Repeat now. You may yet beat... There is a wet, soft thunder on the tape that is not thunder at all. A sound like water shoved aside by something large that does not break its own surface. The younger voice blurts an oath and bites it off. Gray says, almost absently, They are changing position. Peregrine, who is they? Lights. The officer's pencil breaks. He finds the stub and holds it like a tooth absent of its root. He hears himself say, Peregrine, you are not required to continue. He means go. He means live. He means leave the ring to the sea. On the tape, there is a dull ring, as if a glass cylinder tapped gently against metal. Gray's voice softens to something the ear reads as joy, not large joy, not foolish, something human-sized. Horta, there is no hostility. Silence. There is a question. The tape scratches as if a palm rested a second on the grill. And an answer, if I can hold it. Hold what? A hush, not the hush of dead air, the hush of a held breath. Then, whisper, quiet, obscured by telephone line snow, a sentence that later will be transcribed 3 different ways by 3 sober men and still refused agreement. The gate consents, or the gate is sent, or the gate is sense. The last is absurd, which makes it haunting. Absurd things attach best when there's nothing else to anchor. Peregrine, the officer says, now pleading and professional in the same breath. You will maintain transmission. You will not. White, clean silence. Not a fade, not a drop. A cut. The machine hums its own tiny hymn. The tape continues to turn. The speaker gives him only the honest sound of electricity living its little life behind the grill. He waits 3 minutes. He calls again. He changes frequency and back, walks the knob in quarter turns, then fine. He writes the time in the book twice as if duplication could summon answer. He sends a general call. A tanker replies from 200 miles east, unaware of any small craft. He hears a fishing fleet at a great distance singing coarse verses to keep time on the net, lively, irreverent, annoyingly alive, and wishes them blessed. He calls again. He calls again. At Aero 244, the recorder catches half a syllable. Not a word. The taped breath of a man shaping one. Then, the low tone that has been contiguous with the world through the whole exchange rises by a fraction, precisely enough to change the feeling in the room, and steps back out of his hearing as if a door closed, gently, by the hand of someone who knows how to leave without rattling the latch. Historians still argue whether the tape is what it claims to be. 3 copies circulate in later years, one muddy, one uncomfortably clear, one blank woven through with rumor alone. Signal analysts point out skip conditions and ducting, freak refraction on humid nights. So far, whispers from whales that can fill a band with language. Skeptics underline the romance of men who want a voice to keep listening to. The officer does not argue. He keeps the original in a drawer under a pile of paperwork that looks like indifference. He fills his log. He writes the last line slowly, so his hand understands the weight. 0221 0244 UTC. Contact with MV Peregrine, unconfirmed call. Position uncertain, bearing unfixable. Last intelligible, we will ask. Subsequent transmission lost abruptly. Continued attempts no reply. He leaves a space and then adds, against protocol, against his own superstition. Silence thereafter. When he stands and looks from the window, the sky is clean and ordinary. The sea does its ancient work as if nothing had happened. He puts his palm to the pane and feels glass the temperature of human skin. Somewhere far offshore, the circle that was not an eye is remembering how to be just water. In the chapel on the island, before dawn, the priest wakes because he thinks a light has moved through the room. He sits up to prove himself wrong. The cylinder on the altar is blind and harmless. He does not touch it. He lies back down and listens to the sea the way a man listens for a footstep he has heard in his house before. At the watch station, the tape spins on into its own measured end. The machine clicks, the reels halt, the leader flickers in the dim red of the lamp. The officer labels it with a number, not a name, because names are promises, and he has learned how quickly the sea spends them. The books on the shelf accept one more page of neat black letters. The room exhales. The pencils lie like small, exhausted bones. And somewhere past the headland, in a place the storm would not enter, the water settles as if smoothing a sheet on an empty bed. The following morning, the harbor wakes under a light that feels too clean for the night that came before. Fishing boats nose out one by one, their engines coughing into the dawn, their wakes drawing white scars across the silver skin of the bay. On the quay, a group of old men in wool caps sit in their usual place, rolling cigarettes with the patience of stones. They have heard whispers already, that the watch station caught a strange call in the night, that the name Peregrine was spoken. None of them say the word Atlantis, but it sits between them like a coin on a table. In the harbor master's office, the officer from the night before stands with his logbook open, his voice steady as he reads the entry aloud. The harbor master listens without expression, though one finger taps the desk at the point where Gray's voice had spoken of lights beneath. A small brass clock ticks in the background, marking a time that is no longer in step with the story they are hearing. The historical fact is simple enough. Great Meteor Seamount, a vast undersea plateau rising from the deep Atlantic, lies roughly where Gray claimed to be. Charted in the early 20th century, its summit is still hundreds of meters below the surface, but its flat top suggests it once stood above the waves, an island worn down by ages and tide. Oceanographers debate whether it ever held human life, but for centuries, sailors crossing the mid-Atlantic ridge have passed tales down of strange lights flickering below its swells. It is here that a fringe belief hooks into the morning's conversation: the Gate of the Ring. A handful of mystics, drawing on Platonic fragments and Hermetic whispers, speak of a circle at sea where currents invert and time folds back upon itself, allowing travelers, if they enter at the right hour, to glimpse the last breath of a vanished world. The name they give it is older than the charts: Thalassa's Eye. They claim it opens only when the sea forgets its own wind. In the tavern near the wharf, a mystery begins to grow like frost on glass. A young deckhand swears that just before dawn, far out on the southern horizon, he saw a faint column of light reaching upward, not lightning, not the glow of a ship, but a straight pale pillar, rising and vanishing without a sound. Others dismiss it as drink-born fancy. But as the morning stretches on, 3 more men from different coves along the coast report seeing something similar. By midday, the tape has been copied once under the harbor master's order and sealed in a metal canister. The original remains at the watch station, tucked into its drawer, but the copy is sent by courier to the capital, where someone in a high office will decide what to do with it. The officer signs a chain of custody form, his name looking smaller than he remembers it. He walks down to the quay after his shift, past the old men, past the nets drying on their racks, and stands at the edge of the water. Somewhere far out, past the sight of the cliffs, the peregrine had spoken, and then fallen silent. The tide slaps against the stone like an animal pawing for entry. That night, under a sky swept bare by wind, the officer dreams. In the dream, he is back at the radio set, but the voice on the other end is his own, older, calling from a place where the horizon has no edge. Behind his voice, a low tone hums, the same tone from the tape, steady, patient, waiting. He wakes with the taste of salt in his mouth, unsure if it is sweat or sea. No ship's report citing the peregrine that day. No distress call is heard. The island returns to its slow, breathing rhythm: fish to market, nets to mend, gossip to tend. And yet, somewhere in the unlit corridors of the Port Authority, a map has been pulled from a drawer and spread flat under a green lamp, a single red circle drawn over the waters west by south of Great Meteor. The harbor master stares at it for a long time. Then, without looking up, he asks the officer, "If you heard him again, would you answer?" The officer hesitates, feeling the hum of the sea in his bones. "Yes," he says. He does not add, "because I think the question was meant for all of us." 3 days pass before the sea speaks again, not in words, but in signs. It begins with a shift in the watercolor near the shoals. Fishermen hauling nets at dawn notice the change first. The blue has gone darker, almost inked, and in the depths below, shapes move with a deliberate slowness. One man swears they're shadows, cast by something above the water, yet when he looks up, the sky is bare. That same afternoon, a merchant ship approaching from Madeira radios the port with a curious report. A faint, low-frequency vibration felt through the hull, as if the ocean itself were thrumming. It is not the vibration of engines or waves. It's deeper, steadier, like a vast heart beating far below. The historical fact slips in quietly here. Hydroacoustic surveys taken over the mid-Atlantic ridge in the 1960s did record strange singing phenomena in certain trenches, sounds whose origins remain unconfirmed. Oceanographers debate whether it's volcanic gas release, shifting tectonic plates, or the calls of unclassified marine life. But fringe circles have their own belief that such resonances are the remnant hum of ancient machinery, still running in the dark, powering cities swallowed by time. In the port tavern, someone whispers the name Lionel Gray again, and it is not met with laughter. The story is retold in pieces: the blue glass cylinder on the dock, the glowing beneath the hull, the voice on the radio. The young deckhand who saw the light column begins sketching it on a napkin, his pencil trembling as if afraid the shape might vanish if drawn too boldly. By nightfall, the wind dies to nothing. The harbor lies slick as black marble, reflecting the lamps in perfect duplicates. It is in this stillness that the watch station picks up a faint transmission, not a voice, but a sequence of 4 tones, repeating every 17 seconds. The officer leans in, recognizing the low hum from Gray's last broadcast. Historians still argue whether patterns like this, reported throughout maritime records, are natural or intentional. But the spacing, the pitch, the unbroken precision, it feels like a code. The officer writes the sequence down, noticing with a shiver that the intervals match exactly the spacing of carved circles on a broken stone slab, recovered years ago from a Mediterranean wreck. A slab some claimed bore Atlantean script. Close to midnight, another report reaches the harbor. A cargo vessel, crossing the coordinates near Great Meteor Seamount, spots a glow below the surface, pale, geometric, like streets lit by moonlight. The sighting lasts less than a minute before a rolling fog swallows it whole. When the mist clears, the sea is empty. The officer cannot sleep. He takes the copied tape from his desk drawer, threads it through the old machine, and listens again. The voice is grainy but certain, carrying through the years. The gate is open. He sits in the dark, staring at the map with its single red circle, and wonders if the hum in the recording is the same hum he now feels in his chest. He doesn't know it yet, but by morning the decision will be made. A ship will leave the harbor, not to search for Lionel Gray, but to follow the sound. And somewhere in the depths, if the fringe believers are right, the machinery of a drowned empire will be waiting, still turning in the dark. They decide quickly, because that is how paper survives storms. A meeting in a narrow room above the harbor office, a table stained with salt and coffee, a rolled chart like a sleeping serpent down the center. The harbor master, 2 officers from the capital, a man in a gray suit who never gives a name, and the radio officer with his logbook under his arm, spine straight as if it were evidence keeping him vertical. They listen once to the copy of the tape. The reels turn. Lionel Gray's voice crosses the room like a knife wrapped in cloth. When the machine clicks and stops, the man in gray rests 2 fingers on the tin and says almost kindly, "There is nothing here we can use." He sets the canister beside his briefcase and slides a form across the table. The harbor master signs, the way a captain signs a weather he cannot argue with. On the quay below, ropes creak and gulls wheel, ignorant of closure. The priest waits by the chapel door, the glass cylinder hidden beneath the altar wrapped in linen, a secret weighted like a net full of invisible fish. The older boy smokes a cigarette he does not light. The younger one cuts bait with a dull knife, every slice the silent recitation of a name. By noon, the word is official enough to travel. Search concluded. No contact. The island registers the sentence the way a body registers a wound that does not bleed. Men look down when they say it aloud, as if the ground might choose to disagree. A notice appears in the window of the harbor office stamped with 2 seals. Vessel overdue, presumed lost. That is the historical fact. It has traveled this road for centuries, from Lloyd's chalkboards to typed casualty returns to neat printed lines. Overdue, missing, presumed. But hear the paper phrase. The man in gray visits the watch station and asks for the original reel. The officer hesitates the length of a breath and produces the copy. The man weighs the tin, nods, and asks to see the ledger. He runs a finger down the column, stops at the line where "we will ask" sits like an untied knot. "A poetic hand," he says, and closes the book. He leaves with the tape in a folder saline stiff with forms, and the air in the room grows larger in his absence, as if the unsaid has pushed back the walls. That evening, the island's small council meets in the schoolhouse under a humming fluorescent tube. The priest is there, and Duarte and the keeper, and 3 women who have buried more than one son to the sea. They speak plainly. No one says Atlantis, no one needs to. The discussion narrows to 2 questions: what to tell the families that ask, and what to do with what the sea has thrown ashore: the curved metal from the storm, the plank with unknown paint, a tangle of wire that hums when the wind crosses it. "Scrap," says one. Relic, says another. Test, says the priest, and does not elaborate. A fringe belief creeps like tide water under the door, that the sea bargains, that it takes and gives, that you must not hoard what it returns. An old woman with a black scarf tight around her face says quietly, "If you keep a thing the deep wants back, it will come for you in your sleep." Someone laughs gently. No one laughs twice. By law, another fact that sits like a flat stone, an inquiry will be opened in the capital, a brief file built of radio logs and weather synopses, last known positions, and sworn statements. In some countries, such files close themselves after 30 years. In others, they simply overlook daylight forever. Historians still argue whether this is bureaucracy, prudence, or politeness, the state's habit of leaving mysteries folded where the public cannot worry them to threads. What is certain is that when, months later, a journalist requests the tape under a Freedom of Information statute old as dust and new as ink, the reply comes courteous and blank. Recorded material inaudible. Chain of custody incomplete. Deterioration, that is the official verb. It means silence. The rescue ship that leaves the island 2 mornings after the storm returns 3 days later with nothing useful to say, and one useful feeling. The crew will not go back. Machines failed without breaking. A buoy moored near the Great Meteor Line reported pressure that couldn't belong to the sky above it. A reflector melted along an edge the sea cannot sharpen. The captain strides down the gangway with a face like a chart you cannot read. "It is bad bottom," he says. The oldest explanation for something that refuses explanation at all. In the chapel, the cylinder sleeps. The priest cannot decide whether to hand it to the authorities or keep it under the bell rope where the altar stone remembers more prayers than the island has mouths. He touches the glass through linen and feels nothing but the idea of cold. That night he dreams again, and in the dream a light moves through a hallway of water and stops at a door, and he knows, as dreamers know things, that the light is asking for permission. He wakes with his hands folded as if he has just handed something to someone. On the mainland, a clerk stamps the file. Closed, insufficient evidence of foul play, a phrase that means everything and nothing. Another clerk enters a notation in a shipping register. Lionel Gray becomes an asterisk, a tide mark on a column of ordinary losses. The man in gray dictates a memo. Recommend no further expenditure of state resources, weather likely cause, speculative testimony to be discouraged. The memo is careful with verbs. It does not forbid. It recommends. It does not erase. It discourages. It is the kind of writing that knows how to live forever in a cabinet. The island lives as islands must. Nets, lamps, laundry whitening in the wind, children running past the chapel door, their laughter the only thing that does not lower its voice when the subject comes up. A tourist asks in bad Portuguese where the Atlantis Museum is and is told politely that the sea is closed. The older boy keeps his cliff path and his unlit cigarettes. The younger learns to oil a reel so it pays out smooth. They do not speak to each other about light or song. Rumor moves in the mainland press like a cloud breaking itself on tall buildings. One paper hints at a hoax, another frames it as a human interest story, a vanished man with a romantic appetite for danger. Scholars write 3 letters to the editor among them, all using the phrase, "Extraordinary claims require extraordinary evidence." A diver from America turns up with a smile in a brochure. He leaves 2 days later without the smile. A novelist comes, walks the quay, stares at the altar too long, and goes home to write about a different sea entirely. What remains is absence shaped like a person. On the anniversary, the priest rings no bell, there is none to ring, and lights 1 candle without permission from any book. The flame fidgets in the draught, finds itself, and stands. He reads the prayer for travelers whose road cannot be mapped, which is not a prayer you find in every missal, and replaces the word road with water without asking anyone. The islanders learn the official phrases and set them aside. They keep their own. He went to the ring. He asked. The sea answered in its way. What the way was, no one agrees. Some believe Lionel lives in a chamber of light under a roof of polished stone, learning a grammar the surface forgot. Some believe he died in the instant he chose not to turn back, that the sea with its endless courtesies can still be absolute. Some believe he came back at night to the harbor wall and watched his name pass from mouth to mouth and decided, in mercy or in mischief, to remain a rumor. Historians still argue whether any of this matters beyond the island, whether one man's vanishing is weather-dressed for theater or a message the age cannot read, or the simple arithmetic of risk multiplied by desire. The argument, like the tide, is loyal. It returns. At the watch station, the radio officer keeps the empty space in his log where the pencil did not move. He cleans the heads on the recorder with a scrap of soft paper and a habit older than his hands. He files the blank tape with its number. He knows that when he retires, the drawer will be someone else's drawer and the label will not say Peregrine, only a code. He also knows which shelf holds the truth, the one behind his ribs that tilts whenever the wind dies and the room begins to sing in the key of water. At dusk, he walks the harbor and looks at the seam the tide leaves on the stones. He thinks about closure as a door that closes because paper says it did, not because anything on the other side agreed. He thinks of the sentence that still hangs open in his ear. We will ask. He answers it in the only way allowed to those still on shore. He waits. The file is stamped, the case is closed, the world is efficiently uninterested. Out beyond the headland, in the place where the storm would not enter, the sea does the small work that makes it eternal, taking back what floats, returning what will teach, smoothing what offends, remembering what is asked of it. It does not forget. It never does. The autumn wind comes earlier this year, pressing a film of haze against the horizon. On days when the tide is low enough, the reef shows its spine, black, wet, ridged like something alive pretending to be stone. Fishermen avoid it even when the nets are hungry. They say it has a sound when the water leaves it bare, a low humming too steady to be the wind, too patient to be anything human. In the capital, the inquiry's report is printed, bound in blue card and placed in the Maritime Archive. It runs to 24 pages, 13 of which are appendices, weather maps, ship's registry data, fragments of intercepted radio traffic. It contains no photographs, though one was taken, a blurred image of the curved metal hauled from the waves, white spray like blown glass on its edge. The photograph is missing from the file, as if forgotten between desks. Historians still argue whether this was an oversight or an erasure. A historian from Lisbon arrives on the island with a battered leather satchel and a polite voice. She says she is writing a book on maritime myths and would like to interview anyone who knew Lionel Gray. She visits the harbor office, the chapel, the watch station. Each place offers her less than she hopes and more than she understands. The harbor master points her toward the path to the high cliffs. The priest tells her some wrecks are only found by those already lost, and the radio officer says nothing, but leaves a cup of coffee on the counter while she examines the logbook. That night, she walks alone to the headland where the younger boy sits with his back to the village lights. The sea is calm, a vast black field without furrows. She asks him if he believes Lionel found anything. He shrugs and says, he found somewhere to go. The answer could mean escape, discovery, or death. She does not ask which. Among the islanders, a new fringe belief takes root quietly, like grass between paving stones, that the ring Lionel spoke of is not a fixed place, but a moving one, a circle of current and shadow that appears only when asked for in the right way. Some say it has followed other ships unnoticed, brushing their keels in the night. Some say it waits to be found again by someone willing to disappear. The priest wrestles with his choice. The glass cylinder beneath the altar has grown heavier in his mind, as if the linen wrapped around it has absorbed part of the sea's weight. He unwraps it once, in secret, when the rain makes the chapel roof whisper like surf. Inside the glass, something faintly luminous clings to the inner wall, not a liquid, not a gas, more like the echo of light. He touches the outside of the glass, and for an instant, the chapel feels larger, as though its walls have slid a few feet farther apart. He rewraps it quickly, murmuring a prayer that names no saint. A fact stubborn enough to survive the decades. The last known coordinates of Lionel Gray's vessel are in a part of the Atlantic once mapped as dangerous for anchorage on imperial charts. Those same charts mark a blank oval nearby, a space where soundings were never recorded or perhaps never returned. Modern surveys list nothing unusual, yet sonar images are strangely pixelated in a narrow band there, as if the sea refuses resolution. The mainland press has moved on, but a late-night radio host in Porto devotes an entire broadcast to the last true Atlantis hunter. She recounts Lionel's story in a voice pitched between lullaby and accusation, adding details she admits may not be factual. A sealed letter sent to a woman in Cadiz, a black-and-white photo of stone steps beneath the waterline, the suggestion that Lionel traveled under a false name. Callers phone in to share dreams of submerged cities, voices in the static, and lights beneath the waves that follow ferries at night. The priest listens in the dark and does not call to correct her. Back on the island, a storm takes one of the fishing skiffs. The two men aboard are found clinging to a buoy near dawn, their faces salt-burned, their eyes unfocused. When asked what happened, they speak over each other in fractured phrases. White arch, columns, light under the boat, song. The harbor master notes exposure, fatigue on the report and closes the matter. But Duarte, listening from the door, writes the words down on the inside cover of a tide calendar. The historian from Lisbon leaves with a notebook full of silences and half-truths. On the ferry, she looks back at the island, its cliffs wrapped in cloud, and wonders whether some stories survive precisely because they refuse to be finished. She will write her book, but she knows it will end without a last page. As autumn deepens, the younger boy, now a little older but not enough to forget, begins to fish farther from shore. Some evenings he returns with the motor idling low, eyes fixed on something behind him. When asked what he saw, he says only, "The water was clear and the bottom wasn't there." The island keeps its balance between the documented and the believed. The file in the capital remains closed. The cylinder in the chapel remains hidden. The reef hums when the tide leaves it bare, and somewhere in the Atlantic, if the old woman's whisper is true, a ring waits for the next question it deems worth answering. Winter comes in with a silvered sky, the kind that swallows the horizon so the sea and the clouds are a single sheet of dull metal. The wind carries the smell of kelp and iron, and the harbor ropes groan against their posts. On nights when the tide runs low, the reef still rises, but now it seems narrower, as if some part of it has slipped away in the dark. Duarte stands at the edge of the quay, collar turned up, watching the water curl in slow, tired arcs. The voices that once filled the tavern with guesses and boasts have quieted. Now the talk of Lionel Gray, if it happens at all, is in the low tones of people discussing a neighbor's illness. The file in the capital remains unopened. The mainland reporters no longer send letters. But in the priest's locked storeroom, the glass cylinder waits, its faint glow softening and sharpening with the moon. One fact still anchors itself in the fog. Lionel's last radio transmission, intercepted by a coastal relay station, carried the words, "Found the ring, entering now," before it dissolved into static. A fringe belief has grown from that fragment that the ring is not a place but a passage, one that opens only when the right combination of will, fear, and desire lines up. Historians still argue whether this could be metaphor, a navigation term, or something far stranger. On a clear night near the year's end, the younger boy rows out beyond the point, carrying only a lantern and a small anchor. From the cliffs, the priest watches him drift into the dark. The lantern glows against the vast black like a coin on velvet until, in a slow blink, it's gone. No splash, no scream, only the tide whispering against stone. By dawn, the skiff is back in the harbor, tied neatly with the anchor still inside. The boy is not found. The island breathes around the absence. The reef hums once more when the water leaves it bare. In the chapel, the priest unwraps the cylinder for the last time. The light inside is dim now, like a memory almost forgotten. He presses his palm to the glass, and for an instant, the air smells of deep water and copper. Then he wraps it again and carries it to the sea, wading out until the cold bites his ribs. With a single motion, he lets it sink. The glow fades into the green below until there is only the reflection of the stars. Time loosens its grip. Years from now, another stranger will arrive with questions and an open notebook. She will hear the same fragments, see the same reef, feel the same unease. She will leave with more absence than answers, and the story will begin again. The wind down begins here, and now the sea grows calm, its breath evening into the steady pull and release that has been its rhythm since before any island had a name. The lanterns in the village dim one by one, leaving the cliffs shadowed and the horizon barely marked by the pale spill of moonlight. Somewhere below, beyond the reach of any diver's light, the currents twist slow and deliberate, curling around shapes older than cities, older than stories. Perhaps Lionel walks there still, beneath columns that lean but never fall, beneath arches where the shadows carry their own tide. Or perhaps there is nothing, just the sea's deep memory, repeating itself in hum and shimmer, waiting for the next set of eyes to mistake it for a welcome. You can almost hear it now, that low vibration in the bones, not in the ears, a sound that might be the reef, might be the current, might be the echo of a man who stepped into a myth and forgot the way back. Let it fade. Let the tide take it. Let the night fold over it like a blanket pulled to the chin. Sleep now. The reef will be here in the morning. The sea will keep its secrets a little longer. And in your dreams, if the water is clear and the bottom isn't there, you'll know the ring has opened for you.